The silent alarm flashed red across Tenzin Chen's station. No sound, just urgent light pulsing through the dim control room of Outpost Epsilon. He froze, fingers hovering above his console. The scanner showed something impossible. An object moving at speeds no human ship could achieve, on direct approach to humanity's furthest outpost. "Computer, verify signal," Tenzin whispered, throat suddenly dry. Signal verified. Unknown vessel. No match to any registered craft. His heart hammered against his ribs. After years of searching empty space, of being ridiculed as the awkward sinolinguist assigned to the dead-end outpost, first contact was happening on his watch. Commander Reyes burst through the door. "Tell me this isn't another false positive, Chen." Tenzin shook his head, pointing to the rapidly approaching signature. "It's slowing down, sir. It's coming to us." The commander leaned over Tenzin's shoulder, squinting at the display. His coffee breath hit Tenzin's cheek as the older man studied the readings. "How fast was it moving?" Reyes asked, voice hushed with the weight of the moment. "Faster than anything we've ever built," Tenzin replied, fingers tapping commands to bring up more data. "At least 3 times our best speed." Then it just slowed down, like it knew exactly where we are. Alarms began to sound throughout the station. Red emergency lights bathed the corridors in a bloody glow as crew members rushed to their stations. Outpost Epsilon, humanity's furthest reach into the stars, had never faced a situation like this. They were scientists and explorers, not soldiers. Tenzin's hands trembled slightly as he enhanced the scanner image. The vessel was unlike anything in human records, sleek and curved where human ships were angular and practical. It seemed to shimmer on the display, as if its surface was constantly moving. "Get me a direct line to Earth Command," Reyes ordered another officer before turning back to Tenzin. "How long until they reach us?" "At current speed, 23 minutes, Tenzin replied. Reyes ran a hand through his gray-streaked hair. "Not enough time for backup. We're on our own." The outpost's small crew of 12 gathered in the control room. Faces pale, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. They had all come to this remote outpost for different reasons, some seeking adventure, others escaping failures back home. None had expected to make history. For Tenzin, this moment felt like validation. The skinny, socially awkward man who had been laughed at through academy for his obsession with theoretical alien languages finally had a chance to prove himself. "I need options, people," Commander Reyes said, his calm voice belying the tension in his shoulders. Dr. Novak, the station's medical officer, spoke first. "We could evacuate. The emergency shuttle would make us look like we're running," Reyes interrupted. "If they're hostile, showing fear might be the worst move." Tenzin cleared his throat, drawing surprised looks from his colleagues. He rarely spoke during briefings. "Sir, request permission to attempt communication when they're in range." Reyes raised an eyebrow. "You've been preparing for this, haven't you, Chen?" "Since I was assigned here, sir," Tenzin admitted. "I've developed protocols based on mathematical constants that should be recognizable to any advanced civilization." The commander nodded slowly. "Do it. Everyone else, standard first contact procedures. No weapons visible, but security on standby." The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Tenzin prepared his communication array, hands moving with surprising steadiness now that he had a purpose. This was what all his years of study had been for. "They're matching our orbit," announced Regia from the navigation station. "Perfect matching. It's like they know our systems." The vessel now hung in space, less than a kilometer from the outpost. Its surface rippled with colors that shouldn't be possible in the void of space, blues and greens shifting to purples and golds. "Any response to standard hailing frequencies?" Reyes asked. "Nothing, sir," replied Communications Officer Torres. "They're receiving but not answering." Tenzin took a deep breath. "I'm ready to try my protocol, Commander." Reyes nodded grimly. "Make it happen, Chen." This is your moment. Tenzin began broadcasting his carefully designed sequence, prime numbers, then the value of pi, followed by simple representations of hydrogen atoms and the solar system. Basic concepts that any technological civilization should recognize. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. The crew held their breath collectively, watching the alien vessel shimmer silently against the backdrop of stars. Then suddenly, the outpost's communication system came alive with a cascade of sounds and symbols flooding every screen. Patterns unlike anything human languages used, but with clear mathematical structure. Tenzin's eyes widened as he stared at the incoming data. "They're responding," he whispered. Then louder, "They're responding." A new symbol appeared on the main view screen, a simple circle with a line drawn through it. Then, slowly, the alien ship began to move toward the outpost's docking bay. "I think," Tenzin said, voice shaking with excitement, "they want to come aboard." 3 days later, Tenzin stood trembling before the Arcani delegation. Their towering, iridescent forms made humans look like children. The lead alien, Zorval, examined Tenzin with 4 golden eyes. "Your species is primitive," Zorval said through the translation device, "yet persistent." Tenzin noticed subtle vibrations in their speech patterns, inconsistencies the translators missed. Something felt wrong. That night, reviewing recordings in his quarters, Tenzin discovered hidden meanings in the Arcani language. They weren't explorers, they were scouts. His blood ran cold when he realized the truth. Earth wasn't being contacted. It was being assessed. When he reported his findings, Commander Reyes laughed. "You're seeing ghosts, Chen. This is the opportunity of a lifetime." Only Vexera, a junior Arcani scientist, seemed interested in his work. "Your understanding of patterns is unusual," she told him privately. "Perhaps not all humans are primitive after all." The meeting room felt too small with the Arcani present. Their bodies shimmered with colors that seemed to shift with their moods, currently a cool blue that Tenzin had come to associate with superiority. 3 human representatives sat across from 4 Arcani, but the aliens dominated the space with their 2-meter height and broad shoulders. Tenzin tried to control his breathing as Zorval's 4 golden eyes studied him. The translator device on the table between them looked simple, a small silver disc, but its technology was beyond anything humans had developed. "You understand our basic terms quickly," Zorval continued, his mouth moving in patterns that didn't match the translated words. "For a species that has barely left its own star system, your adaptability is notable." Commander Reyes beamed with pride beside Tenzin. "We're honored by your interest in our outpost. This exchange of knowledge will benefit both our peoples." The second Arcani, named Krell, made a sound like water hitting hot metal. The translator rendered it as laughter. "What knowledge could you possibly offer us? Your most advanced computers are toys to our children." Tenzin watched their skin ripple with patterns that the translator ignored completely. He had spent the last 3 days obsessively studying the Arcani, recording every sound and movement. His linguistic training told him there was more to their communication than the obvious words. "We have much to learn from each other," Tenzin offered carefully. Vexera, the smallest of the Arcani delegation, turned her gaze toward him. Unlike the others, her eyes were violet instead of gold, marking her lower status among their hierarchy. She studied him with what seemed like genuine curiosity. The meeting ended with promises of further cultural exchange. The Arcani had already shared basic information about their vast civilization that spanned hundreds of star systems. In return, humans had given them full access to Earth's historical and scientific databases. Back in his quarters that night, Tenzin replayed the recordings for the 12th time. He slowed down the footage, watching the ripples across Zorval's skin as he spoke about Earth. There it was again, a pattern of dark lines that formed briefly whenever they mentioned human technology or defenses. Tenzin cross-referenced it with other conversations and found the same pattern appeared when discussing what he now realized were potential threats. He pulled up more footage, this time focusing on Krell. The aggressive Arcani had a different pattern, fast-moving circles, when describing Earth's position near key space lanes. "They're not here for friendship," Tenzin whispered to himself. "They're assessing us for conquest, colonization." He worked through the night, building a rudimentary dictionary of the Arcani's secondary language, the one spoken through skin patterns and subtle vibrations. By morning, he was certain, the Arcani were scouts for something much larger, and Earth was a target. With shaking hands, Tenzin compiled his evidence and headed to Commander Rey's office. The commander listened for 10 minutes before interrupting. "Chen, do you hear yourself?" Reyes laughed, leaning back in his chair. "Secret skin languages. Hidden threats. You're seeing ghosts." "Sir, I've documented every instance. The patterns are consistent," Tenzin insisted, pulling up his data. "When they discuss our weapons capabilities, their skin forms these threat markers. When they talk about our population centers..." "Enough." Reyes slammed his hand on the desk. "This is the opportunity of a lifetime. First contact with an advanced civilization. I won't have you jeopardizing it with paranoid theories." "But sir..." "That's an order, Chen. Not another word about this." Defeated, Tenzin left the office. In the corridor, he nearly collided with Vexera. The Arcani scientist stepped back, her skin rippling with what Tenzin now recognized as surprise. "You move quietly," he said cautiously. "Your understanding of patterns is unusual," she told him privately, her violet eyes studying his face. "I have watched your work with our language. You see things others miss." Tenzin's heart raced. Was this a threat or something else? "I'm just doing my job," he said carefully. Vexera's skin rippled in a pattern he hadn't seen before. "Perhaps not all humans are primitive after all," she said, leaning closer. "And perhaps not all Arcani agree on how to approach your world." She glided away before he could respond, leaving Tenzin frozen in the corridor, wondering if he'd just found an ally or another, more subtle threat. The attack came at midnight. Alarms blared as Tenzin woke to the station shaking. Explosions echoed through corridors as he grabbed his research tablet and ran. Bodies littered the hallways. Human bodies. The peaceful Arcani had shown their true intentions. Rounding a corner, Tenzin collided with Vexera. "You!" he gasped, backing away. "There's no time," she hissed, grabbing his arm. "The others don't know I'm helping you. My people are wrong about humans. We need to escape." "Why should I trust you?" "Because without me, you'll be dead in minutes. And without you, my resistance faction has no proof of the Empire's true plans." As they reached the emergency shuttles, Tenzin looked back at the burning outpost. Humanity's furthest reach into space, now a graveyard. The floor beneath them shuddered as another explosion tore through the station. Tenzin stumbled, catching himself against the wall. The emergency lights bathed everything in red, making the blood on the floor look like dark oil. "How did this happen?" Tenzin demanded, his voice tight with rage and fear as he followed Vexera toward the shuttle bay. "They were just sitting in meetings this morning. The Empire never intended peace," Vexera said, her violet eyes scanning ahead. "The delegation was assessing your weaknesses. Once they confirmed your outpost's defenses, the warship hiding beyond your moon attacked." A section of ceiling collapsed behind them, sparks showering down from torn cables. The station's artificial gravity flickered, making Tenzin's stomach lurch. "What about Commander Reyes?" "The others?" Tenzin asked, though he already knew the answer from the bodies they'd passed. Vexera's skin darkened to a deep blue. The command center was targeted first. No survivors. She paused at a junction, checking both directions before pulling him left. Zorval's orders were clear. No witnesses, no warning for Earth. As they rounded the next corner, they came face to face with Krell. The large Arcani warrior stood blocking their path, his skin pulsing angry red. In his three-fingered hand, he held a weapon that hummed with energy. "Traitor," He snarled at Vexera, the translator around his neck converting his clicks and whistles. I knew you were weak. The real weakness is blind obedience, Krell, Vexera replied, stepping protectively in front of Tenzin. These humans deserve to exist, just as we do. Krell's golden eyes narrowed. Step aside. The human dies now. Tenzin watched in horror as Krell raised his weapon. But Vexera moved with startling speed, her arm extending to twice its normal length as she struck Krell's chest. The larger Arcani staggered back, surprised by the attack. Run. Vexera shouted to Tenzin. Shuttle bay, third door. Tenzin hesitated only a second before sprinting past the fighting aliens. Behind him, he heard sounds of struggle. The wet slap of Arcani limbs striking each other, harsh breathing, and the high-pitched whine of energy weapons. The shuttle bay door was sealed. Tenzin slammed his palm against the emergency override, praying the backup systems still worked. The door slid open with painful slowness, revealing the small bay beyond. 3 emergency shuttles remained docked, their sleek forms untouched by the destruction ravaging the rest of the station. Tenzin rushed to the nearest one, activating the entry sequence. The craft's systems hummed to life as the door slid open. He looked back toward the corridor, wondering if he should wait for Vexera or save himself. The decision was made for him when Vexera stumbled through the doorway, purple blood seeping from a wound in her side. Start the launch sequence, she gasped, collapsing into the shuttle behind him. Tenzin sealed the door and jumped into the pilot's seat. His hands flew over the controls, initiating the emergency launch protocol he practiced but never expected to use. Krell, he asked, not looking back as the shuttle's engines powered up. Will not follow us, Vexera answered weakly. But others will. The bay doors opened to the star-filled blackness of space. Beyond, Tenzin could see the true horror of the situation. A massive Arcani warship hung in space, its weapons still firing on the dying outpost. Smaller attack vessels swarmed around it like angry insects. We'll never outrun them, Tenzin whispered as the shuttle cleared the bay. We don't need to outrun them, Vexera said, pulling herself into the co-pilot's seat. Purple blood smeared the console as she entered coordinates. We just need to reach the jump point before they notice us. The small shuttle accelerated away from the station, just as a final explosion tore through its core. The outpost, humanity's proudest achievement, their furthest reach into the stars, burst apart in a silent flash of fire and debris. Everything I warned them about, Tenzin said, his voice hollow as he watched the destruction fade behind them. All those people. Their deaths will mean something, Vexera promised, her voice growing weaker. If we can warn Earth. If we can reach my people in the Resistance. As their shuttle raced toward the jump point, Tenzin glanced at the alien beside him. His enemy's enemy, now his only ally in the vastness of space. He wondered what other secrets she held, and whether either of them would live long enough to see this through. Their small shuttle drifted, power failing after the Arcani warship's attack. Earth was months away at their current speed. Oxygen would last weeks at most. Your people have no chance, Vexera said softly. The Empire has conquered 12 species more advanced than humans. Tenzin studied the damaged systems. Then they've never met humans before. He began dismantling the translator, repurposing parts. Vexera watched in confusion as Tenzin connected seemingly unrelated components. What are you doing? Something impossible, he replied, focused on his work. Days later, when Tenzin had created a functioning communication array from parts never designed to work together, Vexera stared in disbelief. How did you know this would function? Your species doesn't have the technology to understand these components. Tenzin smiled. We don't need to understand everything to make it work. Humans adapt. It's what we do best. The shuttle cabin had grown cold as power systems failed one by one. Tenzin's breath made small clouds in the air as he hunched over his workstation, fingers numb but still moving with careful precision. Around him lay the disassembled parts of the translator, the emergency beacon, and even pieces of the life support backup system he'd deemed non-essential. Vexera huddled in the corner, her normally vibrant skin now a dull gray blue as her body tried to conserve heat. Arcani were more sensitive to cold than humans, Tenzin had learned. Another piece of information that might help Earth, if they ever reached it. The main fleet will reach your home planet in 52 days, Vexera said, wrapping her arms around herself. Without warning, Earth will fall in hours. Tenzin didn't look up from his work. Then we have 52 days to save it. Impossible, she said, but with less conviction than before. After watching Tenzin work for days, seeing him create solutions where none should exist, even her certainty had begun to waver. Hand me that coupling, Tenzin said, pointing to a small silver component. As Vexera passed it to him, their fingers touched briefly. Her skin was alarmingly cold. You should rest, he said. Use the thermal blanket. And you should give up, she replied, though she took the blanket. Even if you somehow create a communication device with enough range, it would take months for a signal to reach Earth. Tenzin connected 2 wires, flinching as a small spark jumped between them. Not if I can access the Arcani relay network. Vexera's head snapped up. That's not possible. The network is encrypted. Protected. Everything has a pattern, Tenzin said, echoing what he told Commander Reyes days before the attack. Languages, codes, even your Empire's security systems. I've been studying the patterns in how your ships communicate since they arrived. He connected the final piece, a crystal from Vexera's own personal communicator that she'd reluctantly contributed. The makeshift device hummed to life, casting an eerie blue glow throughout the dim cabin. It's working, Tenzin whispered, almost not believing it himself. Vexera moved closer, studying the strange hybrid of human and Arcani technology. Parts that should never have been compatible somehow functioning together. How did you know this would function? Your species doesn't have the technology to understand these components. Tenzin smiled. We don't need to understand everything to make it work. Humans adapt. It's what we do best. He adjusted several controls, watching numbers scroll across his tablet. When you have limited resources, you learn to use what you have in new ways. Earth history is full of examples, sailors finding their way by stars, prisoners creating tools from scraps, explorers surviving in harsh lands by learning new skills. The Empire sees that as primitive, Vexera said, but her tone suggested admiration rather than scorn. Maybe being primitive is our advantage, Tenzin replied. Your people rely too much on your advanced technology. When it fails, you're lost. The device suddenly emitted a series of tones that made Vexera's skin ripple with surprise. That's an imperial frequency, she said, leaning forward. You've actually accessed the network. Tenzin nodded, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Now we need to send a message Earth will understand, but the Empire won't. Something that will warn them without alerting Zorval that we survived. Even with this connection, your Earth is too far, Vexera warned. The signal will degrade. Not if we boost it through multiple relays, Tenzin said, showing her a map of relay points he'd charted, each one strengthening our message until it reaches home. Vexera's skin pulsed with dark patterns of concern. Using that many relays will alert Imperial security. They'll track us. By then, it will be too late, Tenzin said. Earth will be warned. He began typing rapidly, creating a message encoded in an old Earth cipher, one that predated digital technology, and would be recognizable to Earth's security forces, but appear as random noise to Arcani systems. As he worked, Vexera studied him with growing respect. Her people had dismissed humans as barely worth conquering, just another primitive species occupying valuable space. But watching Tenzin Chin create miracles from scraps, she began to wonder if the Empire had finally met its match. You should prepare for the Empire's response, she said softly. Once we send this message, they will come for us. Tenzin nodded without looking up. I know, but Earth will have a chance. He paused, finally meeting her gaze. "And that's worth any price." Tenzin stood before the United Earth Defense Council, Vexera at his side. The Arcani fleet was 1 week from Earth. "Their language contains their weakness," Tenzin explained. "Their ship's defense systems respond to specific frequency patterns, patterns we can replicate and disrupt." When the Arcani fleet arrived, they expected an easy conquest. Instead, Earth's ships broadcast Tenzin's carefully crafted signals, linguistic viruses that crashed the invaders' systems. The supposedly inferior humans disabled the mighty Arcani Empire's flagship in minutes. As Zor-Val was brought before the council in defeat, he glared at Tenzin. "How? You are nothing." "We're human," Tenzin replied simply. "We turn weaknesses into strengths. We find solutions where none should exist." Later, as Earth celebrated, Tenzin and Vexera watched the sunset from a quiet hillside. "Your people have much to learn," she said. "So do yours," he replied, taking her hand. "Maybe we can teach each other." The room fell silent as Tenzin finished speaking. 12 grim-faced council members stared back at him, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and desperate hope. Behind them, giant screens showed the approaching Arcani Armada, over 30 warships cutting through space toward Earth, now just 7 days away. Admiral Santos leaned forward, her weathered face tight with concentration. "Let me understand this clearly, Mr. Chen. You're saying we can defeat an alien fleet with words?" "Not just words," Tenzin replied, gesturing to the complex diagrams displayed on his tablet. "Patterns. The Arcani ships use a communication system based on their language. Their defensive shields, weapons, even their engines, all respond to specific frequency patterns that mimic their speech." Vexera stepped forward, her violet eyes scanning the suspicious faces before her. 3 weeks ago, she had been the first Arcani to ever set foot on Earth, arriving with Tenzin in their makeshift shuttle after a harrowing journey. Now she stood as Earth's only alien ally. "My people believe their language is perfect," she explained. "So perfect that they built their technology around it. But what they see as strength, your linguist has identified it as weakness." General Harris slammed his fist on the table. "This is absurd. We should be evacuating our cities, not playing with alien grammar." "With respect, General," Tenzin said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Evacuation won't save anyone. The Empire doesn't take prisoners. They harvest resources, including people." The room erupted into argument. Tenzin watched silently, remembering all the voices that had dismissed him before, at the Academy, at Outpost Epsilon, even Commander Rise laughing at his warnings. All of them dead now, except for him. Admiral Santos raised her hand for silence. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Chen?" "A virus," Tenzin said. "Not a computer virus, a linguistic one. We broadcast specific sound patterns on all frequencies, patterns that will create feedback loops in their systems, like speaking a paradox to their ships." "And you created this linguistic virus?" asked Dr. Miyamoto, the council's chief scientist. Tenzin nodded. "With Vexera's help, we tested it on components from our shuttle. It works." The council debated through the night. In the end, with no better options, they approved Tenzin's plan. Earth's remaining ships were fitted with special broadcasting equipment, their crews trained to use the linguistic weapons Tenzin had designed. The day of the invasion dawned clear and bright. Billions watched the skies, knowing what was coming but unable to flee. Earth's small defense fleet, just 27 ships against the Arcani Armada, moved into position. Aboard the flagship Terra, Tenzin and Vexera stood on the bridge, watching as the enemy ships appeared, first as points of light, then growing larger, their sleek forms beautiful and terrifying. "All ships, commence broadcast," Admiral Santos ordered. The linguistic virus went out across all frequencies. At first, nothing happened. The Arcani ships continued their approach, weapons powering up. Tenzin held his breath. Then, one by one, the alien vessels began to falter. Their lights flickered. Some drifted off course, their engines failing as the paradoxical language patterns crashed their systems. On the main view screen, they watched as the Arcani flagship, Zorval's massive command vessel, shuddered to a halt, its weapons going dark. "It's working," Vexera whispered, her skin pulsing with patterns of amazement. Within minutes, the mighty Arcani fleet was disabled. Earth ships moved in to capture the vessels, boarding parties securing the confused and helpless crews. Zorval, supreme commander of the Arcani Empire's expansion fleet, was brought to Earth in chains. In the Grand Council chamber, he faced his captors, his golden eyes burning with rage and confusion. "How?" he demanded, looking at Tenzin. "How did primitive creatures like you defeat the greatest fleet in 12 star systems? You are nothing." Tenzin met his gaze steadily. "We're human," he replied simply. "We turn weaknesses into strengths. We find solutions where none should exist. The Empire will send more ships," Zorval threatened. "Let them come," Admiral Santos said. "Thanks to Mr. Chen and Vexera, we now control your fleet and understand your technology. Any ship the Empire sends will meet the same fate." Days later, as celebrations continued around the world, Tenzin and Vexera slipped away from the crowds. They found a quiet hillside overlooking the Pacific Ocean, watching as the sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. "Your world is beautiful," Vexera said, her skin reflecting the sunset colors. "It's your world too now," Tenzin replied, "if you want it to be." She turned to him, violet eyes thoughtful. "Your people have much to learn about the galaxy." "So do yours," he said, taking her hand. His fingers intertwined with her 3 longer ones, different yet somehow fitting perfectly together. "Maybe we can teach each other." As darkness fell and stars appeared above them, Tenzin thought about all they had lost and all they had saved. Outpost Epsilon was gone, but Earth remained, and perhaps in the unlikeliest of ways, humanity had found its place among the stars.